All night we have been keeping a close eye on what's been happening in the Capitol. This hour we had expected for much of the day to see a vote in the Senate on the defense bill. Now, this is the bill that funds the entire military. There's a ton of important stuff in it. Republicans have been filibustering the entire funding of the Pentagon as a means of stopping the potential repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. Well, today, Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska joined Republican Senator Scott Brown of Massachusetts in saying that she would vote to defy the Republican filibuster and, as a side matter, repeal the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. Lots of back and forth today about whether Republican Senator Susan Collins would also vote to let the debate begin on repealing the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. We were expecting to find out whether it would be tonight. But at this hour, it appears that that vote will not happen tonight. The Senate is an unpredictable animal at this point, so we will keep you posted if things change. Of course, the even bigger political issue in Washington right now is taxes. Every Republican senator signed a letter to President Obama, you'll recall, saying they wouldn't work on anything else until they'd settled the issue of whether or not income over $250,000 a year would get a special bonus tax cut. The White House and congressional Republicans came to an agreement on that issue on Monday. So is agreeing to that framework enough for Republicans to consent to now work on anything else? Or does it actually have to be debated and passed and signed, sealed, and delivered before anything else is allowed to happen? If that's the case, it is hard to imagine how anything gets done anytime soon. Today, former Republican President George H.W. Bush came out in support of the Senate ratifying the nukes treaty with Russia. Former Bush Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice came out in favor of that yesterday. That vote on the nukes treaty, the START treaty, that one's still on deck. The DREAM Act, which would grant legal status to immigrants who complete 2 years of college or who join the military, that vote is still on deck. Given the news tonight, the defense authorization bill is still on deck, including, of course, Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And, of course, there is that tax cuts deal.
I think Democrats are looking at this bill, and you've already had a whole bunch of them who've said this makes sense. And I think the more they look at it, the more of them are going to say this makes sense. This is the right thing to do. I expect everybody to examine it carefully. When they do, I think they're going to feel confident that, in fact, this is the right course.
All day today, the White House press office blasted out emails to reporters showcasing various politicians who support the president's tax deal with Republicans. This is not usually a thing the White House does. This kind of email blasting of reporters on something like this is usually the sort of thing that you would see, say, from the Democratic Party. But in this case, it was the White House itself. And the list of people they touted as supporting the president's deal with Republicans ended up being sort of an eye-catching list. Vermont Governor Jim Douglas supports the deal. Oklahoma City Mayor Mick Cornett supports the deal. Detroit Mayor Dave Bing supports the deal. The cavalcade of emails like this from the White House today prompted a bit of teasing of the White House on Twitter by political reporters who were on the receiving end of the emails. Quote, breaking from White House, Duluth area glassblower Hubert T. Grimsett backs Obama/GOP tax cut compromise. Breaking, White House announces support for tax cuts deal from guy who delivered Thai food to the speechwriters today. The White House, sensing it had become the butt of the joke here, decided to get in on the joke, which is always a good idea. Press Secretary Robert Gibbs tweeted, quote, President Josiah Bartlett release is all ready to go, just waiting to hit send. Mr. Gibbs, of course, referring there to the fictional President Josiah Bartlett from the great TV show The West Wing. To also be clear, I follow somebody who says he's President Bartlett on Twitter, and that person's reaction to the president saying, I had to negotiate with these hostage takers, they were going to hurt the hostage, they were going to hurt the American people. Fake President Bartlett's response to that was, look, I'm not an expert or anything, but I'm pretty sure when someone holds people hostage and demands a jet, you don't give them the damn jet. All joking aside, or not. This is a bit of a political crisis for the Obama administration. Common wisdom about political fights like this is that presidents can afford to kick a little sand in the face of their base. They can afford to disappoint their own party when they need to because, after all, where's the president's own party going to go? They're not going to abandon the president. By making this deal with Republicans, the president made most Republicans very happy, as you can see from the happy-looking Republicans. Good times! But the president made most Democrats, other than the guy who delivered Thai food to the speechwriters today, it made a lot of Democrats really unhappy, and that is not just an optics problem for the White House. This is a political crisis because if Democrats are against the deal, if they vote no on the deal, then the deal doesn't happen, and then nobody knows what happens next in Washington. or what happens to any of the other things that anyone wants to get done. Even the supposed must-get-done things. Can't get there if you are a president without a party. Beltway Common Wisdom is always pretty anti-Democrat, in my view. Beltway Common Wisdom is always pretty enthusiastic about Democrats telling the Democratic base to go shove it. Beltway Common Wisdom is very, very condescending and snotty to the whole idea of a Democratic base. In this case, though, saying no to the Democratic base, taking away the half loaf the Democratic base is used to getting in any negotiation and telling them to get by instead on crumbs this time. In this case, it means Washington coming to a halt. If this is a political crisis, how does it get solved? Joining us now is New York Times columnist Frank Rich. Mr. Rich, it is nice to see you again. Thanks for coming in.
Nice to see you.
Do you agree with me that this is a at least potential political crisis here, is that the president has had a bit of a breakup with his own party?
Yes, potentially, but I think there's sort of hypocrisy, too, on at least in part of some of the congressional Democrats, because where were they pushing the White House when something might have really happened during the campaign for the midterms? Everyone wanted to see the tax cuts for the richest Americans and the super rich expire, but it was really played down by many Democrats as well as the president during the campaign. Now we're in a lame duck session with sort of the gun to everyone's head, and so the sort of rebellion of the congressional base seems to me a little tardy and a little bit theatrical.
So they were timid, saying don't let us do anything that's going to attract headlines or be risky in any direction before the election, and now in retrospect
they're all ginned up. They lost the election, and so they have fewer cards in the deck to play. So where were they then? And now I think they're in a terrible position, because if this bill were to be stalled or die, not only are the Democrats likely to be blamed, even if they don't deserve all the blame or even most of the blame, for not extending unemployment benefits, for not extending middle-class tax cuts, but they'll also, in a way, take don't ask, don't tell, repeal down, START treaty, or could, without any Republican help. So it's a real mess. I don't see who the winners are in this situation. Certainly not the public.
Well, Nancy Pelosi does seem to be able to get things passed in her chamber. We've just actually had word that the House has passed the DREAM Act, which has just happened.
How about that?
How about that? Also, the House under Nancy Pelosi passed the actual Democratic plan on tax cuts, which was an extension for income under $250,000, but not above that. She's able to get it done. You obviously think that she should have done it before the election, but this does have the side effect now of focusing the attention really intently on the Senate. The Senate is where things die. The Senate is where this presidency comes to crisis.
Right, and I think it's a mess because the Senate has this intransigent leadership, and Obama has limited cards to play, and he is sort of still being held hostage, particularly by Republicans, also to some extent by his own party, but it's the Republicans who really have the cards here, and they know what's going to happen after January 1st, and they'll have more of them.
And any Republican of 40 or more, any minority of 40 or more will always have the upper hand in the Senate from here on out. I mean, the idea that it is the Republicans in the Senate, the minority in the Senate, they will continue to be the minority in the Senate, even when the new Congress comes in January, can hamstring not just the Senate itself, but thereby an entire presidential agenda. Seems to me to be a precedent that no minority party is ever going to walk away from.
I think you're right. I think it's an incredibly dysfunctional situation. Look, today everyone's been focused on Susan Collins, who's considered one of the more reasonable, moderate Republicans in the Senate, and she's brought everything to a halt, exactly as you say, and she's considered one of the nice guys. So it's a completely dysfunctional situation, but Obama, I don't see how Obama can beat it, and the Democratic rebellion in the Senate, if there is one, I think is sort of not really a decisive factor in the politics of this.
Does it matter that the president is fighting with Democrats outside of Congress, fighting with his base? Does it matter ultimately?
It matters over the short term, but over the long term, who knows? A lot's going to happen in 2 years, and if the economy turns around, if he does win some victories, he may not win many, but if he does win some, and if he projects, I think, more strength and more commitment to actual ideals of his party, this too could pass.
Frank Rich, New York Times columnist. It's always a real pleasure to have you here, Frank. Thanks a lot.